This is a two-point perspective video to show you how to create a two-point perspective grid from an interior shot. The last video was a two-point perspective exterior, and we did this. We're going to do the same thing, except we're going to take a look at this box as if we were viewing it from the inside. So I'm going to take the box and the configuration that we came up with the last one. I'll just copy both of these over. And using the point command, create a position away from here that's about, let's do 20 feet this time. And then I want to take the object and mirror it to the other side. Actually, I don't want to mirror it to the other side. I want to bring this to about here. So we'll use that back corner as our measuring line there, and we're going to try to imagine that we're standing in this room somehow. We're obviously standing a little bit outside of it, but if we put ourselves too close in here, then a lot of this is going to get distorted. So we want to imagine that if we were standing in the building and miraculously we were able to see inside of it without these walls in the way, what that space would look like. Alright, so once I have the object placed, we still want to follow the same rules about projecting where the vanishing points are. So I'm going to go to the con layer, and using the line command from the node, I want to hold down the shift key and right click and choose parallel. Make sure I'm parallel to that side of the building and see where it hits the picture plane. Repeat that on the opposite side. So using the line command from here, hold down the shift key, right click and choose parallel. I want to be parallel to that side of the building. And that gives me my two vanishing points. Next, I want to create the measuring point, so I'm going to use the circle command, and from the intersection go through the station point to find the measuring point there on one side, and then repeat that process from the other vanishing point location through the station point. There's our measuring point on the other side. Now, just like we did over here, I'm going to copy the ground line. I want to make sure that I don't get any of the other information that we had from the first one. Let's move that over. Looks like we have an extra line there we want to get rid of. And then I want to project, this time not the front corner of the box, but the back corner that's again against the picture plane, down. And I want to make sure that my ground line nodes are lining up with the vertical measuring line that I'm going to be using. This line, because it is the ground line, the vertical measuring line rather, and it's still representing the height of the building. If we're using the same box, we're inside it now, it's still 10 feet. So I'm going to use the lengthen command again. The total length of 10 feet. Pick towards the top of the line, and that's the 10-foot length. And then I want to project each one of these points to identify where the vanishing points and measuring points are. So I'm going to use the line command, go from here to the horizon line, go from that arc's intersection, which is the measuring point, right to the horizon line, measuring point left to the horizon line, and then from the left vanishing point. Using the point command, we're going to place a point at each one of those locations, and then we can just get rid of those projection lines. Now I want to switch to the grid, and this time I want to define the space from the vertical measuring line towards us. So I'm still going to use the same commands. Use the ray command. Go from the vanishing point on the right through the top of the building here and the bottom, and then I want to use the ray command and go from the vanishing point on the left and go from the top of the building to the bottom. So this time, instead of trimming these lines, trimming away this line and this line to the vertical measuring line, and this line and this line to the vertical measuring line, I'm going to trim away these two lines to this line and these two lines back here to this line. So we use the trim command. There's my trimming edge, but I want to get rid of this and this this, and this. So that's representing the back corner of this space now. Should be on the grid layer. And I've got the right wall and the left wall. Alright, we still want to use the correct measuring points for the sides of the building. Remember that this measuring point measures anything along this side of the building, and this measuring point measures anything along that side of the building. So from this measuring point, I'm going to define how far 10 feet would be along this baseline by going through the points on this side, not on that side this time. So we're using the ray command. I'm going to go through this point and count out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Where that hits the baseline of the building is going to be where I put my vertical line to indicate where the end of the building is. Alright, from the opposite side I'm going to do the same thing using the ray command. I'm going to go from my measuring point and go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 spaces. And where it hits that line, we're going to use a vertical line to define the end of the building that way. So this box would technically stop or end here and here. And if we zoom in a little bit closer, what I explained up here about removing these two walls, if you will, of this box allows us to be able to see inside of it. You don't necessarily have to trim to those lines. You can actually extend the box further than that. We can make the length of this wall as long as we want to. But I'm going to stop here for these purposes. Alright, for defining the wall feature, the floor features here, the floor grid in particular, there's one extra step that we have to do that we didn't have to do over here. And I'm going to show you what that is. We're going to do the same thing by defining these points along the baseline, but it's not from here that we're going to define the floor lines. We're going to go from our vanishing point after the fact. So using the ray command, I'm going to go from my measuring point right through each one of these points. And that gives me where 1 foot increments would be along that baseline. Once I find those points here, I'm going to draw a line from those intersections up along this wall. And that defines the depth in the wall grid. And then I want to get rid of these lines, because now that I have all of these endpoints I can snap to, I want to use those from my vanishing point. So from my vanishing point, the lines, if we had floor lines to represent the grid on the floor, we would have lines that are going this way to that vanishing point and lines that are going this way to this vanishing point back here. So I want to go from this vanishing point ray, from here through each one of these points that I defined along the baseline of the inside wall. And now I've got this floor grid defining 1 foot increments along the floor. So I really don't need any of these lines beyond this edge. Okay, so let's repeat all of that. This time we're going to go from the measuring point right through these points here on this side. So use the ray command, go from here through each one of these points. And where those lines intersect this edge here is where I'm going to draw a vertical line. Okay, and now this is where people get really confused and look at this and you think, well, this looks like this is right. You've got the grid down here, but these lines, remember, were only here to define where these points were on the baseline. If you leave these lines the way they are, these are not in the correct position to define the grid for the floor. We want to erase these and then create rays that come from the vanishing point, not the measuring point, to define the floor grid. So I'm going to use the ray command, go from my vanishing point, and make sure I hit the endpoints of each one of these lines that I that I have intersecting the baseline of that wall, and that defines my proper floor grid. So now I want to trim these lines from here to here. Just get rid of all those. And we can define where we want to stop these lines. Go ahead and make it exactly 10 foot by 10 foot box with the side open up like we said. And that would define that space. Now for the vertical heights, just divide that vertical measuring line into 10 equal segments again. Let's put those on the construction layer. And then go from your vanishing points right through each one of those nodes. Trim the vanishing points from the node. Like so. And then we want to go from vanishing point left. Using a ray, go through each one of the nodes in the opposite direction. And then trim using these two lines as our trimming edges to get rid of all the extra lines we don't need. And there is a pretty decent grid for an interior grid. If I turn off the construction layers, you probably can see it a lot better. That we have the floor area, the ceiling, and we could create another grid from the ceiling by simply just using the vanishing points to go through each one of these points here to define the grid lines from the left vanishing point, and then from the right side vanishing point going through each one of these points here. Those will define the grid from the right vanishing point, creating a grid on the ceiling as well.